1 and 2. Member seeking a call, Claire Beaumont.
Carol.
Oh, I'm sorry, I keep doing that. My apologies.
You do. You're kind of merging us.
You shouldn't sit together. Carol Beaumont, my apologies.
That's all right. So, Mr. Chair, speaking to the Credit Contracts and Financial Services Law Reform Bill, I want to talk about the missed opportunity here, the missed opportunity we had to get cross-party consensus, as others have talked about in this House, and to put in place a really strong bill that actually would have seriously amended legislation in this area and reformed it properly to give us a full range of tools that we could have used to deal with some of the practices that happen in consumer credit. That is not to say that there aren't many good features in this bill, and we have worked constructively as a select committee to improve the bill as introduced into the House, and as others have noted, and I noted in earlier contributions, with really solid assistance from officials. Thank you again for that. We have improved the bill over what was introduced into the House, and yet we fail to make a particularly important addition to this bill. And to me, that has been solely driven by ideology. That in the end, that right across number of years now, we've had the same tired old reasons trotted out as to why we cannot have interest rate caps. Because of potentially unintended consequences, because it will drive some of these third-tier lenders out of business potentially, because it will become the target rather than a cap. These are the same tired old reasons trotted out year after year, and actually it's not good enough. We have not had a robust analysis of what happens in other jurisdictions, where in fact increasingly those jurisdictions are adding interest rate caps. They are saying that this is the only way. The UK is the classic example where the Tory government there were vehemently opposed to interest rate caps, vehemently opposed, and had to do a U-turn at the end of last year, and actually the Chancellor of the Exchequer, I think it was, actually said, we have come to the realisation that this is the only way to deal with the problem of interest rates being charged by payday lenders. And so here we think that we can just trot out the same tired old reasons and not put something into this bill which, alongside the other provisions, alongside the responsible lending principles, alongside the responsible lending code, alongside the disclosure provisions and the controls of fees, or the clarification at least, on fees charged, alongside improving the hardship provisions and all of the other positive elements of this bill, we could have put another tool in that toolbox. And so now we're meant to take it as a matter of faith almost, from some across the House anyway, and from the Minister, that interest rates will be dealt with as a consequence of these other provisions, as a consequence of the responsible lending provisions, that this will suddenly mean that the lenders in this third tier will suddenly realise that the types of abhorrent interest rates, the sorts of rates that the community find offensive, are no longer suitable. Because actually, I think that this is going to be a fallacy, and the Minister didn't in the last part answer my question about getting information now as a baseline, getting the Commerce Commission to actually measure and then reflect as this legislation comes into effect whether or not interest rates are being reduced. Because that's what we're being told, that these other provisions will have a downward pressure on interest rates. Well, let's actually measure it then. Let's actually put that to the test. Because otherwise, what will continue to happen is the sorts of examples that I gave you I gave the House in my contribution last week. And those were examples that I had got that very day, or that very week in fact, in Palmerston North, where we got given examples of interest rates of, where were they, 552%, or a payday lender, 1,080%. Those are two real-life examples from Palmerston North a week or so ago. They will continue without actively seeking to reduce them, which is what an interest rate cap would have done. And so I urge the Minister to say, OK, we will put this to the test. We will look at what's out there now. We will measure it in a year. We'll measure it in 18 months. We'll measure it in 2 years, Mr Chair. Mr Chair, thank you very much, Mr Chair. And see if it does make a blind bit of difference to this really serious issue. And the fact of the matter is that if you ask budget services, they will tell you that these extremely high interest rates are very commonplace, and people are doing their best to pay them back and often do. So, that's a question then of whether that is fair and reasonable. And we talked, in the last part about the purpose provision around the financial services providers registration and dispute scheme and so on, and it said to promote and facilitate the development of fair, efficient and transparent financial markets. Well, how can interest rates, like I've just given examples of, 552% or 1,080%, how can they be claimed by anybody to be fair? They are not fair. We all know that they're not fair. So why, as a House, are we not addressing this issue? Why is it that the government have just been so ideologically opposed to this question that they turned down an opportunity for us to pass a piece of legislation that we've all wanted to see for a very long time unanimously? We could have had a piece of legislation passed unanimously. They failed to do that. And it seems to me that that would have been a very, very strong message indeed to those that actually behave badly in the consumer credit area, if they knew that the Parliament was unanimous about dealing to their issues. And so we are supporting this bill without question because, as I said at the start of this contribution, there are many good features to it. But it is with a great deal of anger, really, that we are having to accept that at this stage there will not be interest rate caps put in place when they should be. It is certainly something that Labor has policy in favour of doing, and we would do, because we do not think that those interest rates are fair. We do not think it's right that the most vulnerable, the families that are struggling the most, should pay excessive interest rates and actually pay that at the cost to their own families, to the cost of their own children, often, in terms of other things that they cannot spend that money on. So this is a very serious matter, and I think, that perhaps this legislation should be called something different. Maybe this should be the Credit Contracts Opposition to Interest Rates Reform Bill, or the Credit Contracts Ideologically Opposed to Interest Rate Caps, or the Credit Contracts New Zealand obviously doesn't have a problem compared to the rest of the world Law Reform Bill. Because why is it, and we have not had this answered, and the Minister hasn't even attempted to address the question of why is it that elsewhere countries have recognised this need, have put in place provisions for interest rate caps, but here we say no, we'll do all these other things, but that's the thing we're not going to touch. What is different about our markets? Why is it that the government is so totally opposed to this question? And it still does not make any sense to me. It would have been a sensible thing to align all of those different tools, in fact, to actually address the various concerns at the same time. So I ask the Minister to get up, to answer those questions. What is different in this market to overseas jurisdictions? If it had been so bad, if it had become the target rather than a cap, why is it that Canada has not repealed their legislation in over 8 years? Why is it that a Tory government in the UK, vehemently opposed to interest rate caps, have accepted it is the only option they've got to control interest rates? What is different here? I urge the Minister to get up and answer that question, and I also remind him of the question I asked in the previous part around actually taking some baseline measures and effectively putting the government some money where its mouth is in terms of actually seeing if all of the other provisions of this legislation does have the effect that they're saying, which is that it will drive down interest rates through things like the responsible lending provisions. So I urge the Minister to get up and address those questions. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Tim McIndoe, point of order.
Mr. Chair, I apologise for this interruption to the debate, but I've just become aware of an email that was sent late in the dinner adjournment, as a result of which I seek leave for all the votes that I have cast since the dinner adjournment on behalf of the Maori Party to be adjusted from 3 to 2.
Leave is sought for that purpose. Is there anyone opposed to that course of action? It appears not. Leave is granted. The record will show. Claire Curran.
Mr. Chair, there's no doubt that